This is what I've christened the JDC 45 degree shooting board. The first thing you'll need to do is grab a couple of bits of 16mm MDF, and the important dimension is the width of the MDF for the rails. The length doesn't matter all that much. You can make it whatever you like, but it needs to be probably a little bit longer than it is wide, so maybe 300mm, but it's not that critical. So we start by sitting the V-rail on and marking that up, because it's going to tell us where we're going to do our first set of holes. The kit comes with a template for working out where to put these holes and a transfer punch. Now, with the transfer punch, be careful, it's just plastic and it's only meant for this one use, just to do this job. You don't need to hit it hard. It will mark the blue tape quite readily. I like to put blue tape on for that reason, because when I do the transfer, I'll find the marks in the blue tape much more readily than I would find them in the MDF itself. So I sit the template up on the MDF and it's marked board side, and that goes in. So the board side writing goes in. You can see where I'm indicating on this with the pencil line, or the writing. So we get that nicely lined up, make sure it's perfectly lined up. You can see that piece of pine I've got on the end, just to make sure. I can drop my transfer punch in and give it a very light tap. Make sure everything's still nicely lined up. Nothing's moved. A very light tap. Make sure again, before I do each of the holes, there's 3 holes there for the mounting bolts, which come up from underneath so that they don't appear anywhere in the V-rail where your plane's going to run. And this is designed to accommodate the Veritas block plane, or also you can use the Wood River or the Leuben, very similar block planes, so the dimensions are cut for that in particular. I just use a pencil to mark these before I go to the drill press, just makes it easier to find when you get over there, and we're ready to go. Now the mounting hardware is 5mm, and there's 3 holes in the bottom of the V-rail, and they're tapped for M5, and the kit will come with 3 M5 cap head screws. And so we're going to drill these 3 holes that we've marked now. I'm going to start with a small bit, 2.5, 3 mil or thereabouts. It gives me my alignment. Drilling through from the top, I've got a sacrificial piece underneath to make sure I'm not blowing the MDF out, and I'm going to drill the 3 holes. Pretty important to get these as close as you possibly can, although we will have a little bit of wriggle room once we've finished here in a sec. So I take my time, I find where I want to drill the 3 holes, I make a start, I get these 3 holes drilled. And then once I've done that, I turn the piece of MDF over, and I'm using a Forstner bit with a head that's slightly larger than the head of the cap screw, and the cap screw typically will be around about 10mm or just under. So I'm using here a Forstner bit that will be 10mm, but probably a 12mm one would be even better, just give you a little bit more wriggle room. So again, from the back we're going to come down about 8 or 9mm into the MDF, so that the head is completely below the MDF once we screw it into the base of the V-rail. So again, I'm going to do these 3. Again, being reasonably particular about getting it lined up with the pilot hole that we put through, and then we finish off by turning over and using a 6mm brad point this is how we get a little bit of wriggle room when we mount up. Not a lot. If you had a 1/4 inch brad point, that would be ideal probably for this application, but not critical. I do like the brad point though for this job, because I can use the center point to get it right on that pilot hole. The pilot hole could possibly have been a tad smaller, but if you're careful, you'll get this without too much trouble. I'm using a drill press because I've got one, but you could just as easily do it with a hand drill. Just take it slowly and make sure you're as square as possible. So we put our cap screws in, pretty straightforward. I'm using a washer under them just so that they sit nicely on the MDF. And this will be all stainless hardware that will come with the kit. Now you're screwing into plastic, so the biggest mistake you can make here is to over tighten these screws. They don't have to be ripped down, they just need to be nipped up tight so it doesn't slide once you do the final assembly. So I've grabbed my Allen wrench, and again just bringing these up. At this stage I haven't tightened them at all, they're only just bottoming out, and we'll see why in a minute. You can see I'm starting the screw backwards. That's an old trick which allows the thread of the screw to line up with the thread in the body of the plastic. It saves you cross threading, and it'll save you tearing that thread out. So a quick check to make sure that I'm nice and square on the MDF, and you can see a little bit of fine adjustment there just to make sure. And once we're happy that we're square, it doesn't matter if it overhangs slightly, but it's important that it is square on that on the board, just to make the next steps a little bit easier. It's not 100% critical, but it just is easier if you get it start. Now you can see how little I'm turning that. Would not be a 1/4 of a turn. Just making sure each of those, just a tiny little turn, just to make sure they are tight. That won't move. That's as solid as a rock. And you can see how neat that looks in the board. Okay. So we take our other piece of 16mm MDF now, just double checking that my square is there. So we've got it square. I marked this corner as the reference is absolutely at 90, just in case, but it's not really critical. And now we take our second piece of 16mm and set it on top, hard up against the V-rail, and we're ready to glue up. Okay, so we're back the next day and the glue up's finished, and we can finish the assembly. Now the important part of this construction is to ensure that we have the middle rails exactly square to the V-rail. So once again I'm using blue tape so that I can mark out where the mounting holes need to go. I've laid out the top rail first to roughly get myself set up with where the blue tape needs to go, and once we have the tape in place we can start marking out. So these middle rails need to be set back slightly from the V-rail. So you want just a small gap between the 45-degree face of the middle rail and the end of that top board. Maybe a credit card thickness would be good, or a business card, but just a small gap, because that allows the plane to smoothly run across in the V-rail without catching on those middle rails. I'm using a square just to set up the rail at the end, the top rail at the end of the board, and then I use another square which fits neatly into the V-rail to get the middle rail square. And I also want that top rail to be set back slightly, not as much as the middle rail, but just the tiniest amount. It's really there to help support the block plane as it runs up and down without using it as a reference face. And once I'm happy with that, we go and start with our normal procedure with the transfer punch. Again, a very light tap, and we get our markings for our middle rail connection. Now, since I did this design, I've changed the design slightly so that the top rail has a slot in it to give you just a little bit more flexibility in the final adjustment. And so my suggestion is, going forward, that you start with the front hole rather than the middle hole, and then work everything from there. But the principle's the same. We find the spot, we mark it out, and I'm using 5mm threaded inserts, which is a 7.5mm hole, and I go through and I use a couple of bits of pine with a hole in it, as you can see, which allows you to put those inserts in very square to the MDF, which is really important. So we got that one in, we've mounted it up, and now we're doing the same on the other side, getting all of our square and alignment done, doing a mark for the hole, drilling the hole in, adding the insert, and then rinse and repeat. Put it in, check for square again. You can see I've got the top rail in with some alignment pins. In the later version we don't use that, because I'm suggesting you start with the front holes and you have two alignment guides at the back which help you get those two rails set up where they need to be, and then mark with your transfer punch the front holes first, but that'll be obvious when you look at the stuff that I've sent you. It's a bit tedious, just checking, rechecking, taking my time, making sure everything is exactly where it needs to be. Getting my marks done. If you get this right at the start, then it makes it so much easier. Again, this is 5mm hardware with a 6.5mm or thereabouts hole in the rails. So you've got a little bit of play, but not a lot. So you need to take your time and get it as close as you possibly can. So I've worked through the process now. I've got all the inserts done. You can see I've used a little bit of paste wax on those threaded inserts to make them easier to fit, and then I just a very light sanding with some 400 paper to make sure there's no high spots. There's a high spot there, you can see I'm just taking that off. And of course once this is finished, you can finish the MDF with some clear poly or some paste wax or whatever your preferred finish is. Jim would have done it with some poly, from what I can see of the one that I've got of the original boards. Okay, so let's put it all together. Again, we don't want to over tighten anything because the plastic grips really quite well. Once you've set it up, you're not going to have anything drift about. Again, I've got washers under the 5mm cap head screws. We'll put the front rail on. In the version I've sent you, this front rail has a slotted hole which allows you to get that adjustment at the top just right. I found that with this version it was just too touchy, and it was the risk of the blade catching on the plastic. Also, in the one that I've sent you, you'll notice that I've added some chamfers to allow the blade to clear. So there we go. This assembly is really simple. The only thing, of course, I haven't got is the bench hook, which I added later. So the little block plane just runs in there beautifully. It's very smooth, very easy to run it up and down. And so don't forget the sacrificial fence that goes in to make sure we're not going to get any chip out. And that's why you want that middle rail or that lower rail to be back just a tad, so that there's no chance the blade's going to catch on it. Okay, so we'll grab a scrap of hardwood. Not sure what it is. A piece of an offcut from something that you sent me to make a box for my granddaughter, I think. Obviously taking too long to find it. Apologies for such poor editing. Here we go. We're back. Alright. It's a little bit of, I think, might be 6mm. Just got to get it in the right spot. Get the blade adjusted on the little block plane better, and there we go. As easy as that. And of course, when you have a look at the 45 that you've done, and this is starting with a, it's not even just fettling one in, this is a 90-degree piece. It didn't have a 45 on it at all, so I'm starting from scratch here and putting a 45 on. Bench hook will stop that movement, of course. If it's not absolutely equal across the face, then it's a pretty simple matter of just adjusting that middle fence in or out at the back by the smallest amount to make sure you end up with a perfectly square 45. But on this occasion, it's pretty damn close, I think. So I'm pretty happy with that. And yeah, I added the bench hook on later. In fact, I cut that overhang of that MDF off the back and used that as the hook, and everything was fine from there. And as I said, the parts that I've sent you are slightly different to what you're seeing here, but the principle's the same. So you'll be able to put one together and tell me what you think. Thanks, Cole.